Hello and welcome to R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, editor-in-chief, and today we are diving into biohazard remediation. My special guest is Jordan Frady. He is the project supervisor at First On Site, and he specializes in biohazard response and trauma scene remediation. And he has a certification with ABRA, the CBRT, and he has 5 years of field experience. He's a former supervisor of crime and trauma scene cleanup operations, and he's developed a deep expertise in contamination control, regulatory compliance, and compassionate client interaction. He's also known for calm leadership in high stakes environments, and he excels in guiding teams through emotionally charged situations while ensuring safety and exceptional service delivery. Please welcome Jordan.
Thank you very much for that, Kayla.
You're very welcome. Welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm super excited to cover this topic today with you and just
Yeah,
kind of shed some light on some different sides of the bioremediation that many people may not talk about or know about. So,
right.
to start a little bit about you, you
Yeah,
you are a former U.S. Marine. Before I ask any questions, thank you for your service. Much
thank you.
appreciated. With that being said, your experience as a Marine probably helped shape your leadership style. How did that shape your leadership style, if you don't mind sharing?
Um, yeah, I think I know from the very basic level, I guess, you get a lot of experience dealing with different types of people, people from all around the country, the world, even different backgrounds, different personality types, in high stress environments, not coming from a combat background or anything like that, but even just through training for those combat scenarios, we try to replicate the stress of combat the best that we can without being there. And so kind of get some of that experience and seeing how people, might break down when they get stressful or how they rise to, whatever the challenge is when they get stressful. And so I think that's kind of helped lead kind of into this realm where you have people of different walks of life going through some of the most traumatic and potentially stressful experiences that they'll ever go through.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, just having that background with people from all over the world and not just the United States probably did help you see people's behavior and how they respond to things. And, I think there's a huge part in the bio side of things where you have to have compassion and empathy. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just about doing the job. And so, you know, hearing your background and the training, I think it really did pay off for you transitioning over into this side of things. So I know you worked really closely with the San Antonio Police Department and the Housing Authority.
Yeah.
How do you see biohazard remediation intersecting with the public health and community well-being, which because it's a metropolitan area, I know that there's a little bit different scenarios that go on, especially like I'm in Las Vegas, right? So crime
Oh
is
yeah.
higher,
Yeah.
and things like that. How do you see, that intersecting with public health and community?
Yeah. It's 100% an aspect of the community and an aspect that most of the community, the police department, being a part of that they are unaware of. So to me, that was the most fascinating aspect. So most of my work with the San Antonio Police Department was actually like helping clean their vehicles. So when they would pick someone up, it could be as simple as, a drunken night and they got picked up and they urinated, in the back of their car, all the way to someone who got picked up after a gunshot and was bleeding out in the back of the car. We would go and decontaminate those vehicles. And what was fascinating was having the conversations with the different, patrol officers, detectives, and how much they didn't even know about our service. They were like, I don't know, I just came outside and my car would be clean. We didn't know who did it, right? And that's often their response to the families and members of the community who ask them these questions. Officers go in there, they do their reports, they do everything that they need to, and then they leave. And they've shared their stories, usually very emotional stories of being in a position where a family member says, what do you mean you're leaving? What about all of this? Who's going to take care of this? And the ones that never had an answer for that, that didn't sit right with them. And so getting that message out to those people who are first on scene, and seeing these types of trauma scenes, and for them to have that answer hey, give a call to XYZ company, or do a search for this type of company. There are people out there that do this work. Because ultimately they'll just try doing it on their own. So to be able to give them the resources to lead them in the right direction.
Well, I would definitely say most people don't understand that your police department, your fire department, really any department that's responding a first responder's job is to take care of the situation, not the aftermath, if you will, or
Right.
what's left behind. And I think,
Yeah.
to your point, a lot of people are left to actually clean up, if you will, and they're not highly trained or qualified to do so. And so, one story that really resonates with me, honestly, is years ago, my hairdresser was actually part of a murder suicide, and her
Mm,
family actually had to clean up the home. And this was well before I was in this industry. I had no idea, but just
yeah.
hearing that was very heartbreaking because to your point, even our local law enforcement and first responders, they actually rely on us to come and take care of their vehicles or their buildings or those who have been affected by something like this. And so,
Right.
we are interconnected. At first sight, it may not look like it, right? Because most people don't really understand the processes and procedures of first responders, whether it's police department, fire department, or what have you. There's an
Right.
assumption that they handle start to finish, right? And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the case. And that's where we come into play. And that's where us helping those who need our help the most is so important, right? It's
Exactly.
interesting to hear that because, it's kind of like they don't even know what we do sometimes
Right.
until you
Yeah.
kind of, bridge that gap and kind of discuss, where we fit into their role. So, with that
Yeah.
being said, there's a lot of emotion behind these situations, and people rely on our technical skills, and that's only part of the job, right?
Right.
How do you train or mentor your team to lead with compassion while maintaining professional boundaries?
Right. Yeah. Definitely a huge topic in the industry. Right. So when a big thing is some of those names in the industry that maybe don't have that side. And you get, news reports and different social media posts of families sharing their experience when they've been met with a company that doesn't meet them with that compassion, whether that comes from the financial side or just from how they felt that they were handled during that process of, from the start of the job to the end. And so compassion is always a huge thing that we talk about with our technicians. And it's interesting because it's not like a tangible skill. I feel like that you can like, all right, hey, let's go to the IRCRC and get our compassion cert. Like we don't have that, right? So it's a good
Yeah.
question of how do we teach that? And I mean, from my experience, at least a big part of it is just trying to find that in someone when we're in that interview process. Not that you can't kind of coach them through having a bit more compassion or maybe using language that's more compassionate, but I feel like you kind of have to find someone who already has like that kind of giving empathetic nature about them when you're in that interview process. More specifically, if they're going to be someone who's going to be making contact with clients, people that are going through these situations, and if they're
Yeah, I
going
would
to be
definitely say,
yeah.
yeah, good point. Sorry, keep going. I was just gonna say
No, yeah.
that's great feedback right there. Keep going. Sorry.
I was just saying, if they're just a technician, all you need to do is, get in there and get down to work. Maybe they don't, necessarily need to have that. Maybe focus more on their other, highly useful skills that they have. But definitely for those people making, having the interactions, I feel like it's kind of just an innate thing that they kind of have to already have. And then from there, you do some coaching, like I said, in specific verbiage and how you speak and how you respond and what responses to expect from them and different things like that.
Yeah, and I would definitely say to your point, like it's yes, you can help excel compassion and empathy, but it takes a person who already has it to serve those who are going through, quite frankly, the worst time of their life, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah.
And to your point, you can have those technicians who go in and they don't have that direct contact with the customer. They're there to do the technical side of things, but your lead or whoever your POC is for your client should have all of those skills. And I think to your point, there are ways to coach people up with the verbiage, the tone that you use,
Right.
And I think, the humanization side of things is huge. And, oftentimes you're not just there to help with the cleanup and making sure that their home is restored to where it was previous or their business or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you're their counselor.
Right.
Sometimes you're their venting person, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes you don't even have to say anything. They just need to be able to speak their feelings in their mind and maybe even a hug. Sometimes hugs go a long way, right? And
Yep.
so those layers of compassion and empathy and just really humanization go a really long way for the people that you're servicing on a regular basis. So I know I
100%.
mentioned you're in San Antonio, but there's a huge biohazard remediation response needed there essentially, and it's starting to happen as you guys are almost a regional hub, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, what does that mean for the city, and how do you guys envision your role in shaping the future in this type of recovery for those you serve?
Yeah. I mean, I think to me, it's really exciting because as we've already kind of touched on, I've been there firsthand to hear the stories of families similar to a story that you shared that, maybe didn't go all the way through, but started that cleanup on their own. And that's not something that anyone should ever have to deal with. Those are some of the most difficult stories I've been told in this line of work is someone who, you know, lost their son took their life in their room. They didn't know what to do, whether it's not knowing what to do or just reacting out of pure just emotions, just start cleaning, in itself. And of course, you have the physical, and safety hazards involved with trying to do that. But to me, more importantly, would be the emotional aspect that you shouldn't ever have to. No one that has not signed up for this, let alone someone that you intimately know, should ever have to go through doing that. And so I think being able to get out there with the resources to be able to help the community, whether that's in the privacy of homes or even public areas. We have a lot of um, there's a you talk about like first responders and not knowing kind of like where their scope ends, right? And it's a big topic of discussion where the firefighters, a scene happens in a public space out in a parking lot, wherever it is, and they just kind of hose it down with their fire hose in an attempt to try to clean up. And then usually we get called in to kind of like a bigger mess that we have to come in and try to contain and clean up. And so it's kind of those areas that I can see us helping in those public spaces, with the resources that we have to help out with some of those larger housing authorities, more, like I said, more public spaces too.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, just, you know, trying to navigate that as far as like making you guys have to clean up a bigger mess essentially because maybe it wasn't done properly. But also to your point earlier in your answer was, no one should have to be the person that cleans up after somebody that they love, right? Like that's your job is to, you know, show your emotion, get with your family and your friend. Like that's the role that, you're supposed to play as a
Right.
consumer, and so, just hearing this puts things into perspective, right? So many people don't even know that this side of the business exists, right? Until it
Yep.
happens to them, if you will, until something like
Yeah.
that happens to them and they're like, who do I go to? They're in such a time of need. And so, like working with your local community helps bridge that gap and also spread awareness, which is really huge, right? Because most people, like your police department, fire department, or even your housing authority, if they're faced with these situations, they're going to say, oh, we're going to call Jordan and his team, and they're going to come in and handle the situation.
Right.
So we've covered quite a bit already, but I do have a question that I think is super important because obviously you're in this line of work because you're passionate about it, right? Maybe
Right.
it's your calling, if you will. Um, can you share a moment from your career that reminded you why this work matters? And it's not just the job, but to my point, it's a calling for you in particular.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many that come to mind, unfortunately. Um, One that I think I like to talk about because I feel like when we talk about trauma and crime scene cleaning, a lot of the obvious scenes kind of come to mind, those, horrific murder suicides, or maybe a young person taking their own life, different things like that. And something that I think is often not talked about as much, and especially when it comes to the compassion side, is like hoarding cleanup. So that's also an aspect that usually falls into this realm. Usually, companies that are doing this kind of work will partake in helping with those kinds of cleanups as well. And so there's a gentleman that I think of who lived in an apartment complex and he struggled with hoarding disorder. And he had called us, and this was not his first time having to call a company to get help in this scenario. And his apartment was, it was pretty bad. He wasn't sleeping on a mattress, he was sleeping on a pile of debris, trash, belongings that were all soaked in
Mm,
urine and fluids. And you could just the amount of shame in his way of being when we first got there was so like sad and apparent, and that he didn't want us to like even really see him or talk to him. It's just kind of like, don't think about me, don't look at me, don't judge me, just kind of help me out here. And we were there for probably a good couple 4 or 5 days. And over the course of that time, it was really cool to see him change and how he kind of came out of his shell and came out. And by the end, he was sitting in the living room, talking to us while we're getting rid of stuff. And he shared that another company that he had used previously to help him in this scenario treated him terribly, like actually giving like saying comments to him, like disrespectfully talking about
mm,
him and how gross he is and how disgusting it is that he could live like this, just completely sent him back into the same struggle, and he really shared with us how much our team, from myself and other technicians that were there, how much we helped him in feeling comfortable and feeling motivated and wanting to, once we leave here with this nice clean apartment for him, be on the right track. And so it's those different scenarios where I talk about often that, in this line of work, we have such a huge impact on people, and we can really be the difference between their journey of healing, whether that be from hoarding or from a traumatic loss. That journey can be start off positive or negative, and we have the ability to change which way that goes.
Yeah, and I would definitely say to your point, he already had one bad experience, so he was already walled off, and just
Yeah.
treating him like a human and with respect and empathy and compassion made a huge
Yeah.
difference. Like they're probably more than likely already depressed in some way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
hence why they have that hoarding issue. And sometimes people lose somebody that they love, which causes them to hoard. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
layers to this, and so I think just taking that time to do that makes a world of difference. And I really appreciate you sharing that story, because this is not just about, restoring their area or cleaning their area. This is about, the impact that you can have on somebody's life, right? Um, you
Seriously.
know, and then to be comfortable enough to talk about, maybe a previous experience, or maybe, hey, thank you
Yeah.
guys for helping me, for understanding that I have a problem, and thank you for helping me. That type of compassion and empathy and honestly love just goes so far for somebody who maybe not see the end, or maybe they're just like, this is just what it is, but you guys came in and definitely helped change his life for the better. And
Yeah.
that's what we're here for, right? That's what this is all about.
Yeah. That was definitely a job that it was cool as a team getting to walk out of there, and you could tell that we all had that mutual feeling of, I mean, it's cool and it's okay to feel good. It's a good thing. It's a cool thing to be able to feel good about what it is that you do every day. And unfortunately, in a lot of our scenarios, we don't always get to feel that. We don't usually walk out of a job with a smile on our face. And so that was one where it's like, this is awesome, and this is what we talk about, and we're really doing what we preach, which is we go in. Everything that you just said was perfect, treating him like a human, because that's what he is. He's another person. We have no idea what life circumstances brought him to this point, and it doesn't really matter. What he needs right now is help and compassion, and he went out of his way to ask for that help, and we provided that. And so it was cool, the pride that we got to walk out of there with, like, we could see it, we could feel it, we could tangibly, experience. We just changed his life. We definitely did. It was a really cool experience.
Yeah, and you could definitely feel like the heaviness when you go into some of those situations, right? And to be able to walk out, to your point, and like be able to feel like he felt a different feeling, whether it was happiness or a sense of relief. He felt that, which made his environment feel that way and made your team realize, oh my gosh, we did such a great job, not
Yeah.
only with the project and task at hand, but with somebody's emotional state in his life and his environment. That is so huge. I mean, hear this is what it's all about to hear these stories because I think they're very relatable and it also shows that we truly do make a difference in people's lives on a regular basis. I don't have any more questions. I think we covered a ton, and I really want to say thank you for taking the time to talk about a different side of biohazard
Yeah.
remediation, and where you come from. And, I think you're in a great position and you help people in a different way based on, your service that you did complete prior because of the training and the walks of life that you were able to see. So thank you for that. Do you have anything to add before we say goodbye for the time?
No, I mean, I just thank you for the opportunity. Like we kind of talked about, one of the big thing is getting that message out there, making sure that the people who need these services know that these services exist in the first place. And so, you know, you doing this allows me an opportunity to, all it takes is one person to hear this that didn't know, that unfortunately goes through a scenario and now knows that they don't have to call me. I don't care. They know that they can call someone and they don't have to go through that themselves. And if one person gets that from being able to see this, or one restorer realizes maybe I should add more compassion into my service, then it's completely worth it. So I appreciate you giving me the platform to be able to talk about something that means a lot to me.
Yes, of course, Jordan. Anytime. I look forward to having you on again in the future. And thank you for all that you do for our industry. And as always, thank you for watching. And we will see you on the next episode of Ask the Expert. Take care.